Hello, my funky individuals. Before we get started, I'm just going to mention that there are a fair few sounds that I use in this tutorial, like samples and shit-wise, that are slightly impractical to obtain. Like, that's not a euphemism. They're not impossible. It just involves a bit of, 2009 archived internet forum digging type thing. Just to ease the weight of that, I've put all of the more obscure sounds that I used into a sample pack, which you can just get for free from the Google Drive in the description. So, you're welcome. All right, with that out of the way, let's commence the prologue of the musical tuition session. First, a history lesson. Towards the end of the 70s, disco was going out of fashion and funk was beginning its resurgence. Now, at this point, there were two major schools of funk. One was the Detroit sound, pioneered by our mate, George Clinton. And then there was the Minneapolis sound, pioneered by the other big fella, Prince. Now, the Minneapolis sound ended up being probably more popular in the 80s, I'd say. Prince went on to inspire, the majority of 80s funk artists, like Midnight Star, Cameo, Kool and the Gang sound of the 80s. Its main thing was kind of tightness. I don't know, it was tight, it was rigid, heavily featured drum machines and synths, and it was minimalist as well. It didn't go exorbitant texturally. On the other hand, George's sound, the George Clinton sound, the Detroit sound, was much more lively. It was a bit slower as well, generally between 90 and 110 BPM, whereas the Prince sound was 100 to 130 sometimes. It featured a lot more live elements, room claps and shit. And also it was much less to the grid. It was much more live sound. Felt like there were a bunch of people on stage playing it. And that makes sense because, George's background is the head of the largest funk collective in human history, Parliament Funkadelic. Anyway, George's sound, despite ending up being less popular in the 80s, did end up proving to be the most chronologically pervasive in the sense that it influenced the most artists from after his time period. He basically pioneered the sound of G-Funk, 90s West Coast hip-hop, Snoop Dogg and shit, while also really giving a lot of influence to East Coast artists as well, like Digital Underground. And also, he was a major influential, production figure for major funk productions in the 80s. He was the producer for Zapp and Roger, and, their music has his George sound as well. So, yeah, I guess I should really say that this title is, clickbait in a sense, because I'm not really just sticking to the music under George's name exclusively. I'm going to the music that was influenced by / produced by George as well. And I've got a playlist, a Spotify playlist, which I'm going to put in the description of all of the primary, individual songs that have influenced this tutorial. All right, cool. With that out of the way, let's actually get into the shoot. Step one is to make sure you are sufficiently funkily dressed. Now, for someone who is as naturally handsome and impeccably dressed as me, really all it takes is the addition of some funky speed glasses. Voila. Oh yeah, god damn. But yeah, no, ultimately they're just wear loads of collars and shit. George's main look in the 80s was a bit like a refined crackhead, I suppose. Speaks for itself. And it makes sense too, because step two is to be under the influence of a whole array of substances. Now, in the 70s, George's poison of choice was acid, lysergic acid diethylamide, and that was responsible for his more wild funkadelic shit, 14-minute long jams, which are clearly just him and a bunch of his mates fucking around in the control room with level faders and shit. But in the 80s, George moved on to coke. Now, it is worth noting that a lot of George's solo music in the 80s was definitely less good than his music in the 70s, and it is, I think he said himself, it's attributable to his exorbitant coke usage. His belief that he could only be creative on it destroyed his ability to be creative at all. But yeah, no, point is, drugs for music are good at first, but they get bad later, so my advice to you is make the most of it at the beginning. Alright, with that in mind, I'll be right back. Alright, boys! Let's get into the actual musical element of it, shall we? Step first and foremost is the drums. The drums are probably one of the most crucial and unique defining elements of the George sound, and it's primarily the fat as fuck distinctive George Clinton clap sound, and I shall get to that in a second. But first off, it's the kick. Really, the structure of this beat is just going to be some variation of a super simple stomp clap kind of thing, at about 100 BPM. Doesn't have to be too heavy. It should have a bit of bass to it and a lot of punch. I've added a bit of gated reverb. That's optional. You can also just choose a sample with gated reverb. Also, I've done a bit of the Poltec low-end EQ trick, just to add a bit of low-end beef to it. You can just use an EQ. You can just use a different sample. Pattern-wise, it's super close to just a 4 on the floor, but on the third beat, there's another kick. And also, it's swung. It's not total triplet swing. It's like a live human swing. That is it for the kick. Now, the next and most crucial step is the clap. So really, it's going to come from layering very many drum machine clap samples and live claps as well. We'll go through them each individually. First layer is this one. I think that's from an EMU drumulator. I've pitched it down because that's something they did. Makes it fatter, I suppose. Also, I've got just like a plain snare as well. Fairly fat snare that's like from an older sample pack. This distinctive clap as well. Short, fat, punchy. Also, a reminder, all of these sounds are going into the sample pack, so don't worry if you don't have immediate access to them. That's those two laid together. Next one, this one's really important as well. Goes, and then mix that with like live studio room claps type thing. And then finally, on every fourth snare, have another heavier clap coming on top, just kind of like bringing the phrase over to the next phrase, I don't know, capping it off. What I've got is this, I think it's from a Korg M1 actually. Not totally accurate to the gear George would have been using, but a sound is a sound. It sounds like a whip cracking, which I like. Yeah, I've added a bit of slapback stereo delay to it and just some limiting, so it sounds more dynamically even, fatter, and a bit of noise gate to give it that 80s gated sound. Before that fat clap, I've got a reverse thing as well, just to bring it back in. Together, that sounds like this. Alright, this next bit is really crucial. When George Clinton was making Atomic Dog, his sound engineer in the studio was fucking around with tapes and decided to play this beat backwards over the top of this other beat he had. And George really likes that sound, and it ended up being like a crucial part of his 80s solo works, as well as the music that like he produced and inspired. So what I've done is I've got this beat, which I made previously, which kind of sounds a bit like this. It's just another George Clinton type beat, and I've reversed it. And that goes over the top of everything else, so it's kind of like whoomph, flat, whoomph, flat. Just kind of makes everything slide into everything else. On top of that, just some basic percussion stuff. I've got a reversed Lindrum cabassa, I don't know, which I've got with like an auto pan, so it's going. And then also I've got an open hat on every downbeat, every downbeat at the start of every bar, and then a hat on every downbeat. And that is the drums complete. On top of that, just got a bit of post-processing. I've got an RC20 doing a bit of tape emulation, and then a glue compressor, and then just an EQ to get rid of some gross frequencies. And also finally, between each 8-bar phrase, have a drum fill going in, like a resampled kind of drum fill. It's nice if it has like a kind of tight, fat, almost 70s sound to it. I think the sample I've got here is from an older sample pack, the quintessential, the go-to. Oh, so fat. Good on you, Oliver. That's the drums done. That is the drums complete. Next up, I reckon, let's do some guitar. I cannot play guitar. As much as I would love to be authentic to the nature of 70s and 80s funk recordings, I just don't have the physical means to do so. As such, I think it's appropriate that I use samples for this. As morally abhorrent as that is, it's the only work around here. So, I've got two distinct guitar samples, and they're both really chopped up, really like minimal, just adding like almost like a rhythmic thing rather than a harmonic thing of sorts. First one I've got is a wah guitar. It's doing a kind of like dissonant Hendrix chord thing, and I've got that on every beat where there's a kick. I passed the fuck out of it and then added some really heavy tape, like it's almost like a megaphone. And that's panned totally to the right, which is a lot cleaner. Use your gut instinct when composing guitar parts. Some fairly straightforward funk stuff. And in each fill bit, got a kind of Prince controversy type pattern where it goes to like fill it in. Straightforward stuff. And that is guitar. That is the guitar done. Easy. Next up is the synths. Start with the most crucial one of them all, the synth bass. Alright, I'm just going to go through the patch quickly. Okay. Bass patch, super classic movie type patch. It's a really basic 2 oscillator setup. I've got one playing a square and another playing a saw, an octave up, chuck them together without the filter, and then like this. And then chuck a bit of filter in. Obviously a low pass. I have got this on a 4-pole filter setting. It's based on the 4035 chip. Means about as much to me as Greek does to a non-Greek speaker, to speak proverbial. So yeah, I'll chuck the filter down and such. You'll need headphones to hear that properly, but fuck man, that's good. Bring the resonance up a touch. Pump the filter to the ADSR. Right now it's got a bit of decay on it. I'm gonna add a tiny bit of attack so it gets that funky what to it. And that is literally the patch. That is the extent of the patch. It's that easy. You can do it on any bit of hardware, any bit of software. I'm lucky enough to have this bit of hardware and I feel a moral obligation to use it to justify my $500 expenditure. But the reason it was a $500 expenditure is because the MIDI is fucked. The MIDI simply does not work. So I'm gonna have to use the old-fashioned method when I'm recording of just getting the part right. All right, that's all for the patch. The other synth that George just really loves to use is the OBXA. The jump synth, the 1999 synth, the classic 80s growl synth. OBXD. Oh my god, shut up. OBXD is... What you dog doing? OBXD is... Oh my god, shut up. Holy shit, dog. OBXD is a... Holy fucking shit. Am I just not allowed to talk about the synth? Like, what the fuck? OBXD is a fantastic software emulation of the OBXA. Shut up, don't make a noise. So you can use it for all sorts of funky OBXA sounds. Starting off with this one. And also this sound, George uses loads, especially in Atomic Dog. And then also, you know, you can't have a funk track without a Juno, just top it off with some Juno stabs. Music theory wise, it's just starting off on like a super basic, like -7, and then it slides down. And it's got some delayed vibrato as well. On top of that, I've got like a Juno filter rise thing happening. Also super basic shit. Now, the final and most crucial step is the vocals. Now, George himself is primarily a vocalist. Like, his first, like, big musical output was a doo-wop barbershop quartet called The Parliaments, which then turned into Funkadelic, and then Parliament again, and also Funkadelic simultaneously. But as such, you know, he's been a fan his entire life of big fat vocal stacks. So really the trick is to record a fuck ton of layers of like gospel kind of vocals. I'm not a fantastic vocalist, I wish I could do like full gospel, choir, fucking soul type vocals, but I've given it my best shot. Also lyrics wise, George Clinton has a thing with dogs. He has a bit of an infatuation with hounds and obsession with canines. It ended up being that track, Atomic Dog, that gave Snoop Dogg the idea to put dog in his name. But look, okay, keeping true with the dog theme, I have decided lyrically to paraphrase one of the most culturally influential bits of culture from our generation, the kind of thing that will be highlighted in anthropology textbooks for millennia to come, and that is... A. Let me get a mint. Let me get one too. Let me hold one.
What the dog doing?
By King Buck.
What the dog doing? Oh my god, no. What the dog doing?
Woof, woof, what the dog doing? Woof, woof, what the dog doing? Also, I've put a bunch of talk box in there too.
Oh, yeah, what the dog doing? Oh, yeah.
If you own a talk box, like myself, you can do that. It's not crucial to the George sound, it's more kind of pushing towards the Zapp and Roger direction, but nonetheless it's funky age, man. So by all means do that if you can. Processing wise, I've got all of them going through like basic compression. On the master bus, I've got like a classic preamp, then just some glue compression. And with that, I believe we're done. So, here's the finished track.
What the dog doing? I know it's a fuck shit. Oh my god, no. What the dog doing?
Woof, what the dog doing? Woof, what the dog doing? Woof, what the dog doing?
What the dog doing?
Yo, what the dog doing and what the dog doing with the rhythm and the style of the dog.